Just me for now. Good morning, everybody. For those I haven't met, I'm Laura Beasley. I'm Local Authority Coordinator for National Energy Action. Fantastic to see so many of you this morning. I will just take 1 minute. Obviously, I have a vested interest, but I have loved at conference this year that we've really made the point about the pivotal role that local and combined authorities and the growing number of city mayors we have across the country playing a role in tackling fuel poverty, and it's been fantastic to highlight that. I think we must remember that local authorities, combined authorities, play a really varied role, be that at the acute end of providing crisis support, but also the pivotal role in convening the right partners to work through strategy, pool resource, think about how we do energy efficiency at scale, and also thinking about all of those green skills, jobs and growth that Mayor Rotherham was talking about this morning. So it's been a great conference for me this year to hear all of the discussion around that, so that's fantastic. My actual role is to do a bit of housekeeping for you this morning. So just to let you know, there's no planned fire alarm for today. Do keep working on those socials. We really love to hear what's inspiring you about conference this year. Please do continue to share, tweet, go on Blue Sky. Remember, it's #FuelPovertyConf. So please do take part. Remember, we have that box for warm home plans, suggestions, thoughts and ideas. And do make sure in the breaks today, if you haven't had a chance to look at some of the exhibition stands, please go and do that. We're really grateful for all of those stands this year, so please do make the most of it. And please do make sure to stay around and have some lunch with us before you start your journeys home. We really do appreciate that networking time, so please stay with us. So yes, the only thing I have to do now is invite our Director of Homes, Colin Timmins, who's also going to be joined by Alastair Mumford, Eleanor Radcliffe, and David Farmer.
Good morning, everyone. Or should I say good morning conference? That sounds quite grand, doesn't it? I think we all know that if we're going to tackle fuel poverty, we need to retrofit millions of homes. We need to make all of those homes affordable to heat, healthy to live in, and part of the journey to net zero. It's a huge challenge, but something I think that we're all aware of. I think where we stand at this moment in time, we cannot afford to make mistakes. We need to try and get the right outcomes from the get-go. What we certainly can't afford are any more catastrophic failures like the one at Fyshwick. You know, these pictures, I was going to say these pictures of Fyshwick, these are pictures of people's homes where failed external wall insulation caused problems of damp and mould in their homes. It led to impacts on their physical and mental health. And this was in 2013. That's over 10 years ago, and there are still people in that situation in Fyshwick. We haven't yet solved all of the problems there. And it's not really just about those big failures as well. We have to think about the knock-on impacts of anything that goes wrong, on any failures in communication or how we actually conduct the work. We've just launched a project with a few pilots, a community retrofit hub project, and we've got people embedded in communities to help householders through the process of retrofit. One of the first things they were finding was that there wasn't a lack of awareness of this. There was actually an active resistance to talking about insulation and about energy efficiency. And that could be because they had friends or neighbours who'd had a bad experience. Could be that they'd heard about something like Fyshwick or other things that you see in the news. It could be that they've actually started on that process and they'd found it very complicated and very stressful and they dropped out of it. Or it can be that the situation where people just feel they've been bombarded by calls, you know, cold calls from people. They don't know who they are, they don't know if they can trust them. And so they've got this resistance to anybody coming to talk to them about insulation or energy efficiency. And that's a really bad starting point to be. So we know that there's a whole host of issues that can be out there. There can be technical problems, there can be institutional problems, there can just be challenges in terms of how we communicate with people, as I say, about their homes and their lives. We know there's loads of problems, and I'm probably the person here with the bad news, but what I've got is a great panel who are going to talk to you today about practical solutions, things that we can do to get the right outcomes so that we can take things forward. And I'm going to ask each of them in turn to come up and do a short presentation on their area of focus, but then we're going to have quite a time for some Q&A. So I'd really like the audience today to get engaged in that. We want to hear from you. I know that you all are aware of problems, you're all working on solutions, so let's have a really healthy debate about how we can actually move forward, start getting things right first time. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Dave Farmer. I'm a research fellow at the University of Salford. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been measuring the thermal performance of building fabric and heating systems, a lot of it in the retrofit sector, some of that in the field, and also in the lab that I run at Energy House 1, which is the University of Salford. It's been crudely described to me as Coronation Street in a fridge. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. I mean, it is a real house from Salford. The bricks are being taken from a house that's being demolished. It was recreated in an environmental chamber, and that kind of gives us control of the weather, in effect. So we can perform repeatable experiments and we can accurately identify the impact of energy efficiency measures. So that could be a change to the heating system, a change to the building fabric. But because we can repeat the weather, we know the only thing that's changed is that intervention. So we can look at testing fabric and heating system performance faster and more accurately than we can do in the field. So what I'm going to be talking to you today about is a project that was performed, it's DESNZ's, it's DEEP project. There was about 18 months of testing at the Energy House. It was split with, kind of interrupted by COVID, and then also the reporting was interrupted by wranglings over whether they wanted some of the stuff released and the government's change of government as well. But we finally got around to publishing it at the end of this year. And it was, in effect, it was a case study. We were doing it in collaboration with other universities who were performing research work as well. And we were looking really to compare the difference between what we were calling a piecemeal approach to retrofit. So you might see a lot of houses out in the field where you might have seen external wall insulation put on, loft insulation, but they're not really done in a joined up package of measures. So it's looking at each, these retrofits are looked at each maybe element like the walls, the roof in isolation without thinking about how they interact with other ones. We wanted to compare that with what we call the whole house approach to retrofit. It was before past 2035 when they did the research, but it has a lot of tie-ins with it. So we were looking at how a fabric retrofit would improve the thermal performance of a solid wall end terrace house, but also any unintended consequences from the retrofit, and how that different kind of approaches to retrofit would look at the risks of surface condensation and mold growth, particularly at junctions. But not only that, we also, during the testing as well, we wanted to see, a lot of people might do a fabric retrofit, but forget actually that one of the really important things other than the occupant as well as how much energy we use is the heating system as well. So how did the retrofit impact the efficiency of an existing gas central heating system in a house? So maybe people need to think about that as well. So we looked into that. And then we also tried to identify the point during a solid wall retrofit of an end terrace when an air source heat pump might have similar running costs to gas, because a lot of people, yeah, they want to save carbon, but really, you know, someone's not going to be very happy if you stick an air source heat pump in your house and it costs double to heat it. So we need to think about actually the costs there as well. So to do that, we performed 2 retrofits, but it was all in stages. And we started off with a house with very little insulation in it, 100 mil in the loft, 1980s double glazing, everything was pretty uninsulated. And then we went through this process of gradually insulating each element And we're going through it in kind of the stages where we start with the cheapest and simplest all the way up to the most expensive, and that was at stage 5 with the external wall insulation where we wrapped it. Then we changed that from a piecemeal approach retrofit to the whole house approach by looking at specific junctions around the building to then create this nice thermal envelope where the whole building was being wrapped and we hadn't missed out any junctions in terms of insulation. So that also gave us a heads up as well on how we might convert existing piecemeal retrofits into this whole house approach. Now, each stage of this test as well, we were measuring the efficiency of the building fabric, how much heat it was losing, and also the efficiency of the heating system. It was no space age stuff here. You know, at the time, there's part L1B was in there, so it was all materials and processes that contractors were familiar with, nothing radical. The external wall insulation system was quite novel, but in effect it was the same spec as a typical system. For those of you who have got some construction background, you might notice a couple of details where we can see the steel frame channel doesn't meet the soffit board, so we've got a gap in insulation there. We see that a lot at the eaves in houses where external wall insulation has been applied and haven't extended the roof line. You can also see below where the DPC level is that we didn't have any insulation there. The other thing as well we didn't do is we didn't move the windows and doors out in line with the external wall insulation, which is considered best practice, and we didn't insulate the bay because that was a tricky junction. So in terms of the whole house approach measures, the bay window is pretty, that was just got wrapped in insulation. We insulated below the DPC level. We extended the eaves to meet external wall insulation, and we moved the openings out in line with the external wall insulation. So we did all these best practice measures afterwards. And if we want to have a look at the impact in terms of surface condensation, mold growth risk, red on these thermal images is bad, so that suggests that these locations are at risk of surface condensation, mold growth, and we can see, if we're looking at this stage 2 in the top left there, we're looking at an external wall on the front wall, and to the left of that is a gable wall. So we can see the walls are really cold. Yeah, there's a risk of surface condensation, mold growth on those, on the existing walls, and lots at junctions. A lot of this depends on how people use a house. Some people might live in there and have no problems whatsoever. Other people might have different moisture generation within the house, different ventilation strategies, different heating strategies. So the risk will vary depending on occupant. But we can see when we put the external wall insulation on, those walls are a lot warmer. The risk of surface condensation, mold growth has been reduced. We can see, though, that along the interface with the roof and the external wall, we still see a red line there, which is indicating a problem at the eaves. When we extended those, that reduced a lot of the risks. Again, around the windows, when we moved those out, the risks was slightly changed. So we can see that some of these whole house approach measures are kind of reducing the risk for the occupant of surface condensation, mold growth. If we look at the number of junctions in the house, we started off with almost, well, yeah, we started off with 2/3 of the junctions really posing a risk of surface condensation, mold growth. By the end of the piecemeal retrofit, we were down to 1/3 of those junctions. And it was throughout the process of the piecemeal, the whole house approach retrofit, we gradually reduced the number of junctions at risk of surface condensation, mold growth, getting rid of the high-risk junction by extending the eaves. But we were at the end of the process, we were still left with some issues that were unavoidable in terms of the retrofit. But the big thing for us is, and maybe the headache for some people out here, is that when we looked at how much the reduction in heat loss from the retrofit, we see that there's the red bars here is how the reduction in heat loss from the house. So we can see that after we put the external wall insulation on, we've got a 50% reduction or 49% reduction in whole house heat loss. So that's, whoever's living in this house can expect to see their heating bills reduced by half, and so that's significant savings. The cost, and be careful here with the cost because we're a university, we always get ripped off, but I think it is commensurate with the actual time and effort that went into the retrofit. So please don't use these costs. It was a one-off. As I say, our whoever's on our supplier list knows someone, because there's some backhanders going on somewhere. But anyway, what we saw there is, in fact, we've reduced the heat loss of the house by 50%, but what have we got? We've still got some risks remaining in terms of surface condensation and mold growth. So by going through the process of these whole house approach measures, at the end we'd increase the cost of the retrofit by 50%. But if you're looking at it in terms of the heat loss reduction savings, it's barely changed since stage 5. So, it's almost unmeasurable in terms of 49 or 51% reduction. So this raises a bit of a headache in terms of how you're going to pay for these healthier homes, because it's not really going to be through paybacks in energy savings. Yes, of course, you can get that initial reduction by the solid wall insulation. The other ones were relatively small because of, there's diminishing returns with insulation. But yeah, it was a big one there. We also found as well that maybe some of these measures weren't needed as well. So, we need to look into getting those survey tools where we know which measures are needed without spending the money on maybe unnecessary retrofits which aren't reducing the risk any further. We did a couple of bits on the central heating system. We found that with these old style class 1 controls, which basically turn the boiler on and off on your left, you see the blue bars as we're going through the retrofit process. The efficiency of the gas boiler is reduced because it's now becoming oversized throughout the retrofit process. So those 50% savings that we're looking at in terms of heat loss from the fabric, you might not get those because your heating system's efficiency is being reduced. But we were testing as well some other types of boiler controls, the ones that lowered the flow temperature, and we found that those are less susceptible to post-retrofit oversizing. So perhaps a cheap and simple way of people, when they've done a whole house retrofit, instead of changing all the radiators, might be to change the boiler controls. We also found as well reducing the flow temperature to match the heat loss of the house actually had a similar effect in terms of recovering that efficiency. This is not like a blanket thing that the government said reduce to 60, because in some instances that will be bad. We've got to be very careful with vulnerable occupants. If you turn the thermostat down, the flow temperature down too far, they don't know how to turn it back up again. Some houses might need that higher flow temperature, but in this instance, this is calculated, and it wouldn't have that impact in terms of occupants, in terms of their space heating provision. So yeah, we need to look into ensuring as well that we consider the gas central heating system when we do a retrofit. This one's going to gets me into trouble with the air source heat pump brigade. Don't fight me outside. We wanted to see when it would cost the same or cheaper to run a gas central heating system with air source heat pump. And what we kind of found was that when we put the external wall insulation on, the costs were comparable. The final analysis was done in March 2023, but if we perform the analysis when we first started testing in February 2021, it would have still been more expensive to use the air source heat pump. So these considerations are not just about how the fabric performance of the house is, it's also about the ratio between the electricity and gas price. So some people call that the spark price now. So we need to so it's a financial as well as, in terms of the market cost of electricity and gas, that also has a major impact in terms of when you might install an air source heat pump. We also as well didn't do any tests in terms of looking at maybe using time of use tariffs, all these kind of alternative models, and using batteries as well will help. You may notice this installer issue. The coefficient of performance, so basically before we put the external wall insulation on, we're getting 3 times as much heat out of the heat pump as we're putting in. We should have been getting more when we put the EWI on, but the installer put the flow and return pipework in back to front. We were still getting heating, and it was heating as it was before, but luckily we can measure these things, and we knew there's a big problem. Are people going to be able to see that in the field? So it's about that feedback, because installer issues are a big thing, whether it's fabric or retrofit. But we're not saying here as well that you can't put a heat pump in a solid wall house without external insulation, but I think it will certainly help. So in summary, really, I think the major things for the takeouts here from us were that, you know, these healthier homes, it might be more expensive. We might not get those savings back in terms of spacing, energy use to reduce all the risks. So maybe we need to look at that kind of alternative funding models and ensuring that maybe health is considered as well. Yeah, we need to consider the existing heating systems in a retrofit. And also as well, you know, we might need solid wall insulation, which is very expensive for some houses to be viable for air source heat pumps. That's me.
Thanks, Dave. Now we move swiftly on to Alastair Mumford from MCS Foundation.
Great. Thank you very much, Colin. I've never talked about retrofit in a room with a mirror ball. So who said retrofit can't be exciting? This is brilliant to see. So yes, I'm from the MCS Foundation. So we're a foundation charity working to decarbonise homes in the UK. We do that through MCS, which sets standards for the performance of low carbon technology and also the installation of it. So hopefully would stop somebody putting the flow and return the wrong way around. And we also do external affairs, so lobbying of government, and then my area programs. To start, it's just to talk about, well, as we all know, the scale of the retrofit problem is big. It's been highlighted in the numbers today. We also know the progress is very slow. And in some ways, as Colin was saying about Fishwick and some of the other announcements from DESNZ today, we're going backwards. We're still not going in the right direction. And I would say it's not just about cash. You know, I did a quick calculations on the Scotland scheme. So Scotland, they've got support system, they've got grants, and they've got 0% loans, and they've had that for about 4 years. The take-up has been, in the last 3 years, 0.4%. So it's not just cash, it's more than that. And it's, I think, really a lack of coordination and a lack of collaboration. It's being held back by the system that we've got. So just to give down one example of that, we get government grant schemes with a supply chain that doesn't have the capacity to be able to deliver, and also ridiculous timescales. The supply chain can't really find new recruits. We've got a potential pool of new recruits, but they don't really know about the jobs, and also the jobs aren't really attractive to them or seem viable. And that's partly because the career paths that they need to go down are unclear, and the jobs are uncertain, 0 hours, self-employed, etc., etc. We've also got training providers that are struggling to get trainers to deliver the courses. And there are many other sort of examples of where the system isn't working. And really that sort of limits the capacity for us to be able to do something. So what do we need to do? Well, as this slide sort of demonstrates, and I think most policymakers probably think this, is for retrofit, it's just an A to B problem. We put an action in as A, and we will get to an outcome. But of course, like many things, retrofit is very messy. It's everything outside of that lovely room. It's a complicated mess of processes and actors. But although it is messy, I think there is a way of getting a level of organisation in there and improving the situation to deliver the outcomes that we want to see. And so that's what we're looking to try and do, is take a systems-based approach to tackling retrofit, but also, importantly, on a local scale. And so we've developed the local area retrofit accelerator pilot to try and do just that. So the first step was to try and understand the system. So we got together a number of sort of leading stakeholders, National Retrofit Hub and others, to try and understand what the system looks like in England. And that was led by CAG Consultancy, and also builds on work by Dark Matter Labs and others in this area. Now, as I say, that was for England. We hope to do the work in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland this year, because those systems are slightly different as well. That work helps us to understand who the key stakeholders are that we need in the room if we're going to talk about solving the problem. So yes, local authorities, social landlords, training providers, community energy organisations, private landlords, if we can actually get them, and grant providers to a certain extent. But also it helps us to try and understand where the intervention points are in that system, in those processes. Where are the places where we can leverage action by making an intervention, such as grant schemes? Sorry, I'll stay with that slide for a bit longer. So the next one then, once we've done that, when we've understood the system, oh, and sorry, there will be a report on that published soon for people who like to see very complicated diagrams. But we need to then build a mandate for change within a locality. We need to see a fertile ground, so at least some level of collaboration between stakeholders, some level of communication. And, of course, we need to get a lead organisation within those areas to try and take part, to lead activity within the areas. So we did a call for applicants last year, and from we had 28 applications, I think it was, and we've chosen Hertfordshire, sorry, in no particular order, Hertfordshire, Surrey, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and then the Liverpool City region, luckily where we are here today. So the next stage then is the co-design. This is where all the actual work happens. But first we need to analyse those stakeholders. We need to understand who the key people are within all of these organisations. Who can we get to and who can we engage? How are they being communicated with at the moment? And importantly, what are their drivers? We need to know whether there's policies that's pushing them, whether it's regulations, what gets them out of bed at night. That's what we need to understand, because everybody has to see a benefit from the process. I would love it if people just came along because of climate change or because of fuel poverty, but the pressures that all of us are under, we need to find very specific drivers, ways that we can help them. So once we've got all of that and we've got those invitations out, we're then putting people in a room where we facilitate discussions over 3 different workshops. First of all, to understand that everybody agrees where we are. Do the SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, etc.? What are the metrics for the area? Then we can move on to getting an understanding about where do we want to be? What's our vision to go forward? And then, of course, the next section is to actually think about how do we get there? What are the goals and actions to materialize that vision? And importantly, through that process, we need for each stakeholder to see the links with other stakeholders. So what's the link between a social landlord and a training provider? What's the link between a local authority and a community organisation within the area? How can they be supported by other stakeholders? How can they also be held back by others? So through that facilitated process, we then get to draft a local retrofit strategy, which is essentially the plan to get there. So where are we now? Well, this lovely picture here is a workshop in Hertfordshire. This is my favourite bit. So this is a lovely little game where everybody gets to play a stakeholder and they get these lovely resources. And if they just try and work on their goals, their little actions, they won't get much done. But if they think about working with other people, trading resources, they'll get much more done. So we've taken Hertfordshire through the workshops. I've now got the lovely task of putting that together into a local retrofit strategy. But we did get good engagement. I would like to have had more social landlords there. I would love to have had private landlords. But we had reasonable representation. I think we can say that we've spoken, we can speak on behalf of Hertfordshire, and the support for the vision, the actions, and the goals that go to it. So we're now going to be moving to the next areas. We've got Surrey next week, and in a few weeks we'll be in Liverpool City region as well. I think just early findings from that is that the process is definitely showing positive. It's something that's looking like it can work, but also in terms of a clear action, and it's a pretty obvious one, is around a need for centralisation. Some organisation, which could be decentralised within the area, but an office for retrofit, for Hertfordshire or whatever, that is able to coordinate, to encourage people to get things done. But also, with that local retrofit strategy, obviously comes a price tag, and that's where the MCS Foundation is looking to make investments into those areas to support the delivery, particularly with capacity, because there's not many funders for capacity, but we haven't got enough money to be able to do this, so we're trying to bring a coalition of philanthropic and also institutional funders as well to be able to take those things through. I think the sell for them is that because we can co-develop these, because we can get the collaboration for these local retrofit strategies, that should de-risk the investments. There's more chance that we're going to be able to achieve things. And also, in a few months, we'll be publishing the evaluation done by the University College London, so that'll be great. If that evaluation is positive, then we'll publish the toolkit so that other people can go through the process. Also, if it's good, we'll develop a business case for further rollout of the process and potentially lobbying government to see if they might like to support it as well. It won't be for everyone. Some people have got plans in place at the moment, or maybe they want to go down a slightly different route, but I think others can definitely benefit from it. So just to say, as well as us trying to build collaboration, the whole project is intrinsically collaborative. So we've got funding from the Aurora Trust and Greater South East Net Zero Hub, and we're very grateful for that. We're also very grateful for the support from Ashton, National Retrofit Hub, and UK GBC, and hoping to see if I can get Colin along to some of the workshops as well, so that we can really try and move things along and get everybody engaged in this. So, in terms of going forward then, there's also going to be, so for the local authorities out there, the UK GBC, UK Green Building Council, have got a local authority retrofit forum where we'll be providing information on this, so do sign up for that if you can. But essentially, you know, you probably are, but start collaborating. We cannot do this on our own. I know it's difficult, lots of us haven't got spare time, but if you can see the part you play in the system, I think you can see how that you can benefit from it, and you can help other people's life to be easier as well. So I really do encourage everybody to try and put their head above the parapet and engage with others in the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Alastair. And now our final speaker is Eleanor Radcliffe from Carbon Co-op. And as I said at the start, we will be doing Q&A after this session, so please do prepare your questions, observations, or thoughts. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So as Colin mentioned, I'm Ellie. I'm project manager at Carbon Co-op, and it's really lovely to see you all. I hope that there aren't too many sore heads. Yes, it's been a brilliant conference so far. So in terms of what I'm going to be talking about, we've heard about the sort of technical and institutional collaborative perspective on what we need to do to deliver the right outcomes from retrofit. I'm going to be talking about the people side of things, which I'm sure a lot of people in here already resonate with anyway. So there may be a lot of stuff that you've heard before, but it bears saying again because clearly we're not getting it right. So I'm going to be giving you some insights from a project called Retrofit for All. And we're just coming to the end of a research phase at the moment. The project is 2 years. I'll explain a bit more about it, but there's a lot more for us to learn and progress through this work. So a little bit about who we are as Carbon Co-op. So we are a community benefit society based in Manchester. We started in 2011 as a retrofit cooperative, and really we're all about developing collective solutions to decarbonisation with a focus on domestic housing, but our work over time has advanced and kind of developed beyond that. So we have a lot of technical knowledge of retrofit and energy systems. I'm part of the Energy Commons team, and our focus is really on participatory processes and how we can create an energy future with people at its heart so that people can actually shape and own the future energy system. So Retrofit for All is a project that really stems out of an original Retrofit for All toolkit that my colleague Anika, who is here, published in 2021, which was all about centering energy vulnerable people in energy efficiency schemes. At that point in time, there really wasn't much around this, which is why we developed this toolkit. And recently we ran a workshop in September to understand where we were with that toolkit, and practice has come on so much since then. There's loads to learn from, and we're going to be highlighting that through this work. Now, the project that we're on now really comes from a recognition from us in delivering retrofit that retrofit for owner-occupiers who are funding their own retrofit projects compared to those experiencing publicly funded schemes are vastly different in terms of both people's experiences and the outcomes. We know that there are still serious and systemic problems found in insulated homes, as was announced last week, and the MP Mayata talked about the other day, with 39 contractors basically being struck off. And the fact that we're still having these issues when we've seen the disaster of Fishwick and also systematic ignoring effectively of tenant accounts and tenant voices, which to some degree led to tragedies like Grenfell, is an indictment of where we are with this. Now, to say that's a very negative view, there are absolutely loads of examples of good practice in this space, and there's lots to learn from, but it's still not common practice to do it in this way. Everyone's still learning, so it bears mentioning that we really need to centre engagement when we're thinking about retrofit in order to deliver at the scale required, because unless we have people on board, they're not going to come with us on this journey. So the project, like I mentioned, is a 2-year energy redress scheme funded project. It's all about developing more people-centred approaches to retrofit and publicly funded social housing retrofit schemes. So when we started the project, it was focusing on SHDF-funded schemes. We have 3 housing provider partners in Manchester who have been involved in the research phase, and we're now expanding that scope so that we have a lot more housing providers, contractors and tenants involved in the project. The course of the project is effectively, we're using what's described as a double diamond approach, for those who know what that is. But the research phase has involved interviews with housing providers, contractors, and also delivering participatory action research with tenants. So we've trained up tenants who've gone out and done research with their peers to understand their experiences of retrofit through these schemes. Off the back of this, we're now moving into a co-creation phase where we're running a series of workshops to interrogate some journey mapping that we've done based on our research, understanding the pain points for tenants through that process, and starting to develop some solutions, whilst obviously acknowledging the practice that already exists. Coming through that, we're going to be developing new resources, potential support in terms of a service for housing providers, contractors in delivering more people-centred approaches, and also obviously there are big structural issues that are informing the quality of engagement and what's actually possible that we're going to be highlighting through policy papers and events. So these are some quotes from the research so far. These are specifically from the housing provider and contractor interviews. I just got the final participatory action research paper today, so I haven't been able to include the findings in these slides, unfortunately, not in full. But these really highlight some of the core things that have come out of this research. So the top quote is from an RLO, and I think what our colleagues at Liverpool City Region were saying about hiring local people into the retrofit process, into these supply chains is really critical. And one of the things that we've seen is this RLO is a tenant. That has had a big impact on their ability to connect with local people and the way that they are thinking about retrofit. And it feels really obvious, but it's a huge opportunity to think about, what are the skills that people actually need to engage with their communities? What does it mean to be a people person in this context, whilst also being able to talk about energy and retrofit with authority and be trusted? And it has a huge impact for the tenants who are engaging in those schemes, feeling like there's a trusted single point of contact through the process so that they are effectively supported, basically, from pre-retrofit all the way through to post-delivery. The second quote is from one of the housing provider managers and the challenges that they're facing in terms of delivery. So one of the things that we know is that the structure of funding does not actively enable good engagement. To some extent, it frustrates it. The way that funding is structured at the moment for retrofit, particularly for housing providers, is very peak and trough. It is confirmed to some degree, but the bid cycles and the way that delivery has to happen and the pace of procurement means that engagement often gets crushed or just isn't what it needs to be for the types of schemes that exist. And finally, the quote about technology and communication. We pulled this out as quite interesting because we often hear about technology being the solution to engagement, but the reality is that most of the time it's trust and communication that are needed for tenants to feel like they are being listened to and supported and understand the process that they're going through. And this has come up time and time again in different research, but somehow we're still not quite getting it right. So these are just a few things that have come out of the research in terms of what we need to deliver the right outcomes. And I've tried to structure this in terms of just broadly the phases of retrofit. But I think what's quite important to mention is that when we're thinking about retrofit and the whole journey of retrofit, to deliver the right outcomes, it's not just about giving people handover information at the end. If what we want is more people to come on board with these schemes, people need to have a generally positive experience. And yes, there are negative outcomes. Not everything is delivered to the standard that we might want first time, but making sure those challenges can be addressed efficiently and that people feel listened to is incredibly important, because people tell their neighbours, people talk to their families. You can't underestimate word of mouth. And speaking as someone who had a retrofit done on my rental property, it was the worst 2 months of my life. Great in terms of the outcomes, but I would not recommend that process to any of my friends. So in terms of these, pre-retrofit support, one of the things that we saw is that a lot of people actually are told, you're going to save on your bills, it'll be great, but people don't actually understand what they're spending their money on when it comes to energy. They don't understand their energy bills. They don't necessarily understand how they're using energy even prior to retrofit. So actually pairing any energy advice with retrofit could be a really positive way to start engaging people in this conversation and moving them towards a place where you could have some smaller interventions that happen, but then they understand how they're using energy in their homes throughout the course. In terms of effective engagement, obviously we all want effective engagement, but the main thing that came through for us is that there is a no one-size-fits-all. When it comes to programs that require more behavior change, like air source heat pumps, you just need to resource engagement more. Like effective engagement requires funding, and it requires considered approaches to how you combine design and engagement so that that behavior change work is going on alongside the retrofit works that are needed so that people actually understand what's happening to their homes and the behavior change that's going to be required of them. There also needs to be support during delivery. There's absolutely stacks on this through the research, and we are going to be publishing it later in the year. But two main points were, as I mentioned, having a single point of contact throughout that people can trust and isn't going to disappear beyond the actual delivery of measures, and also soft skills among contractors. And this is really significant because I'm not saying that contractors need to be able to do like deep engagement. I'm saying that contractors need to be able to respect people's homes. And where people have had positive experiences of retrofit, it's when contractors have been communicative, have understood how disruptive this is for the tenants, and tenants have felt respected. And again, very basic, but definitely not always the case. And in terms of post-retrofit support, engagement beyond the scheme is absolutely critical. So often you'll find that people have new technology put in, or they'll have retrofit works done on the house. They're given some information at that point in time, but if the RLO or if the communications are coming from the contractor, or they're kind of bounded by the delivery timelines for a scheme, they don't have someone to turn to after that. So you need to consider the fact that people might need support in 6 months or a year, when winter comes around and they're not entirely sure how to use a new heating system or what's going on to try and address any issues that might arise. And that isn't always built in. And then finally, I've already mentioned this, but funding. So funding is currently structured in a way that cramps timelines, causes some issues. We know that engagement has been highlighted as a definite kind of area of development among the kind of social housing fund and what was SHDF. But what we need is funding which is structured in a way which enables tenant needs and engagement to be embedded, resourced and prioritised. So finally, the biggest thing, and again, I feel like this is going to be obvious to a lot of people in the room, is that effective retrofit really requires not just an understanding of stock, but an understanding of people, what they want, how they live, and what they need. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. And as I said, we'd now like to get your input to this session. Do we have any immediate questions? I can't believe that you're shy. Come on, we have some roving microphones around the room. We have a question, comment over there.
Hi, Rebecca from National Energy Action. Just looking at the list that Eleanor put up of the things that are required to make a retrofit work, just made me actually feel a little bit sad, because I've been working in fuel poverty for about 17 years, and we kind of knew this list about 17 years ago. So what do the panel think is the issues causing these really pretty obvious list of things that need to be done before a retrofit program works? Why aren't these being done? What is the hold-up? Why aren't partners working in partnership with each other? What is the big issue that's causing this not to happen?
Maybe start with Ellie on that one. So why is it taking you so long?
Me? So it's me. I'm the problem. I don't know if everyone can hear me. We'll go with it. I mentioned how funding structures frustrate engagement. I'd say that one thing to look at is the way that some of this stuff has been measured over time. Like tenant experience, definitely to date, hasn't been a priority when we're thinking about how to deliver on retrofit. Quite a lot of focus has been given to just the mechanics of installation and kind of getting the right technical solutions for building fabric. I think that at least when it comes to social housing, there are broader challenges when it comes to how tenant voice comes through. There's a lot of work that's gone on in that, and obviously we heard from Clarion yesterday who are doing some brilliant work in that space, and there are a lot of others who are, but that hasn't always been the case. So I think that when we're looking at retrofit, you can't divorce it from the context that we're doing it in and how people do or don't feel heard, and do or don't feel they have agency to raise issues and try and push back. You know, people will live feeling like they can't push because of some form of pushback from their landlord. You know, we heard about that from the session yesterday around the private rented sector. So, yeah, I'd say that we obviously needed it 17 years ago, but I guess the context is really significant when we're thinking about why people haven't necessarily been prioritised within those processes.
I was going to go to Alastair.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an interesting question, isn't it? Because we're talking about solutions, and we've been doing this for decades. You know, do you think we're at a really strong point in terms of finding solutions? Do you think there's a real focus on it, or is it just that so many problems and failures have led us to this point?
Well, I'd like to say yes. I suppose, yeah, there's definitely best practice out there, you know, and Carbon Co-op are leaders in that. I think that, so we've got the solutions, it's just, well, I suppose there's two things to it, really. One is, obviously, we haven't got any time to do this. We haven't got any time. You know, we've got massive problems heading towards us, but the stuff that people, Carbon Co-op are talking about is going to take time. And I often feel that I have to have this sort of cognitive dissonance where we sort of say, there's a massive urgency, but we need to take time over this. And unfortunately we will, because we've got to take people with us, and that's a lot of conversations that need to be had. It's very difficult for our current contract delivery structure to have that. It really is difficult. It needs massive change. Devolution, I think, is helping, but not to name names, but I've talked to devolved administrations, and I've said to them, well, are you going to be consulting and collaborating with your local stakeholders in the development of your retrofit plan? They're like, no, we haven't got time for that. We're just going to do it. It's like, okay. And I think that's going to cause more problems. So, yeah, I think it is down to the systems that we've got in place. We've got to change those. We've got to get new ways of thinking about this. That is difficult for people. But inherently as well, we haven't got capacity in the system either. And that's where, you know, we've been let down by governments for a very long time that have not supported building that capacity. But hopefully we will get that now, and we'll start to see more people with a bit more headspace to be able to join the dots, to be able to go, right, okay, this is how we're going to do it, and have those conversations.
Thank you. Any more questions? I can see a hand at the back on the corridor. And if you could say your name and where you're from, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm Evan Hook from Citizens Advice. It seems like retrofit is definitely the way forward in terms of big savings for consumers, but the big barrier is the inconvenience of it, and it perhaps seems a bit too obvious, but we've got a lot of homes with nobody in them, in between tenancies through social housing or private landlords. Are there any schemes or missed opportunities to potentially subsidise that in-between period and retrofit a house that has no occupier at the time for the next occupier to move in?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take that. Alastair?
So, yeah, it is heavily disruptive, having done some retrofit myself, and obviously Ellie having a lived experience there as well. There are definitely social landlords that are using avoid strategies to do that. There's also much better data coming through, I think, as well. So we've got Parity Projects and others who are coming up with data analysis software for social landlords so that they can actually understand what their building stock is like, when measures need to be done, the best intervention points, and then group those together as well. So I think that could improve. But I think the other thing, and this comes to David's work as well, that yes, it would be great to be able to do a whole house retrofit. You know, that would be the creme de la creme for every single property in the country. That ain't going to happen because not many people are going to be up for that. But there is evidence from your work that you can do piecemeal, stage by stage retrofit and still get reasonable outcomes. There's some great work by the AECB, the Association for Environmentally Conscious Builders, I can never get that last bit right, around their retrofit standard, where they're saying because because the grid is looking like it's going to decarbonise quickly and effectively, that we just need to get onto low carbon heating, so heat pumps or whatever. And there are a number of properties in the country which don't need much energy efficiency improvements to be able to move on to an air source heat pump or ground source heat pump, and their bills to be the same or potentially lower a little bit. So I think we can look now to that the disruption can come down. Obviously, for some properties, there will be a lot of changes need to be made. But again, I think by getting them part of the process, we can make that level of disruption a bit less scary and taking it stage by stage.
Yeah, and just for Dave, because I mean, you've got the luxury at the Energy House, there's nobody in it. You can just go in and do what you want. But are there any technologies you've tested where you've been doing it and thinking, this really wouldn't work with somebody in the house? Or do you think they're all doable?
I think there's some things I think we need to be really careful of, and that's putting technologies on where, in essence, we put them into someone's house and we leave them with it. And so that might be, people might be advocating for ventilation systems that require regular maintenance. So it's all very well and good someone putting that in, leaving it and saying it works, but then you're coming back and what's going to happen over time. So I think we've got to be quite careful. I'm very conscious about, about not recommending things where, unless you've got someone in there that's able to regularly service and maintain some of these retrofit measures, especially around ventilation, that we should be quite careful about going down that path, maybe letting things go naturally. Control strategies which are just too complex. I think at the moment we've got, there's great savings to be made when you combine maybe an air source heat pump with battery, PV, when you've got a home energy management system, but how do those all interact together to be exploited at the best time with the cheap energy from the grid, and maximising all that together. So I think people are going to be swamped with a lot of different technologies where actually you might not need to do a fabric retrofit to really drive down your energy bills, a full fabric retrofit like we did in the Energy House. But actually helping to people get the best out of all these technologies, especially for people who might not be able to grasp how to actually use them, and even ones where that someone with a reasonable technical knowledge will understand it. They don't know how they all interact together. So I think there's a big space at the moment for people to create that that one app that does it all. So I think let's be there's a lot of things out there that people think what might be very nice as well. You've got a positive input ventilation system, and it's meant to be there to dry out to reduce the humidity in the house, but then you're walking in the hallway and you're feeling really cold air coming into your house, and what do people do? They switch it off in winter. So I think it's actually, again, it's going back to what you're saying, you're thinking about the person who's actually living in there and whether they'll actually be able to use that retrofit measure, whether actually, well, it's not just the person who's living in the house at the time, it's who's going to be there next as well. So you can tailor it all very well and good for someone, but is actually the next person there going to be actually able to use those things, or is it going to be suitable for them? So I like to keep it kind of simple if we can.
Can I come in briefly as well on the disruption point? So one thing that we did hear through the research, and obviously disruption is a real concern for people, not least the disruption to their lives, but also like having to redecorate. People put a lot of time and effort into their houses. One thing that we heard at an event that we ran with LSE Housing and Communities, and I'm sure there'll be some housing providers in the room who are doing this or thinking about this, is how you can match retrofit with other stock improvement measures so that you're minimising disruption going into people's houses. So, if you're going in to replace a kitchen or like do work on a bathroom, how could you match that with some work on retrofit at the same time to try and just minimise the numbers of times you're knocking on people's doors for yet another reason to gain entry to their home, which we thought was really obvious. But again, it's interesting to think about what's required for the funding streams to enable that further. And the other thing is, when it comes to all of this conversation about disruption, I think I want to bring it back to like vulnerability and who we're talking about when we talk about kind of fuel poverty, and the fact that, at least in our work, I think someone mentioned a number which was something like 55 to 56% of people in social housing have a long-term disability. And if we're thinking about disruption for people who are vulnerable, and trying to learn to use a new technology, there's a whole other layer of support that's required to make sure that they're confident in what's happening to their homes. And I feel like sometimes there is an assumption that community engagement is just a blanket strategy. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do some events in the community. They're going to be at these times. It can miss a big chunk of people, so having an informed approach to reaching out to people who are vulnerable through this process is really important, and there's a lot of good practice coming through about that, but really using that as a baseline for how you're thinking about engaging with communities and tenants is really important.
Colin, can I just add as well that that for those maybe less vulnerable and have got cash, you know, kitchens and bathrooms market is massive. The kitchen is one of the worst things to do in your house. It's the most disruptive. So we do buy into levels of disruption when we see the benefit, and I think that's what's not happening. People just aren't seeing the benefit. We move house. We always do loads of work when we've moved house. We need to be tapping into those trigger points, as they're called. And also, for some weird reason, I particularly, when we had our first child, we always seem to do work then, when we've got a baby on the way or when the baby's been born. So we need to tap into those times, because we will do a certain level of disruption. Deal with it.
Thank you. Any more? I can see two hands actually along the corridor. Should we take both of those questions and then we'll answer them?
So this is sort of for Eleanor and Alastair. When you were both talking about your presentations, Alastair, you were talking about using games during the Lara workshops, and Eleanor, you were on about training residents to do research with their peers. What do you think was the advantage that was taken using those methods, and how do you think that we should be training stakeholders and decision makers to enable them to be using that more often, as it's something I think we're missing in the retrofit process?
So it was a little bit quiet. So what training do stakeholders need to be looking in a systems way, was that?
Yeah, it's how to take advantage of the sort of the workshops that you were doing with the Lara project, as well as the training of the residents that was mentioned in the Carbon Co-op presentation.
Yeah, so on the first one, well, we've got to do something like Lara in every area. We've got to get them playing games like we showed. That really just helps people to go, oh, right, because we saw it at the tables. We're like, oh, yeah, if I help them, that gets what I want. And, oh, right, okay. So, yeah, definitely got to make people see the benefits of taking a systems-based approach. We've also obviously got to give them the capacity and the resources to be able to do that. In terms of residents as well, I think if I'm following the question right, it's just having those conversations, just like people powered retrofit are facilitating. I think also on that, might not be answering your question, but also meeting people where they are. So there's a great organisation called Round Our Way, which is having conversations with people around climate change, but very much talking about it in their terms. And I think also Balsall Heath did a little bit of this with their retrofit project, was finding out what does the community want. There was, I think, a pathway between the properties that was overgrown. So that was the first thing they did. And then they started to think about retrofit. So we need to, use some form of gateway drugs, or just finding out what communities want. Because retrofit pretty much will fit into everything. But it's talking, letting them have the conversations and listening to them. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but...
There was another question down here. Sorry, the microphone's just come back.
Yeah, thank you very much. James Clark, Energy Saving Trust. This is a question for pretty much all of you. So you've all mentioned best practice quite a lot, and we've seen lots of slides this morning of worst practice. And I think that's what the public see. And obviously we've got an issue here in PR. We've got a problem with convincing people to trust those of us that are talking about retrofit. How do you think we crack that, given that we've got in the room here local authorities and social housing providers and installers, all of which have a bit of a PR problem here? How do we build credibility, or how do we change the conversation a bit so that those tenants who are suspicious of their landlord or suspicious of their local authority, or who've seen these pictures of installers getting it wrong, actually take us seriously when we say this is good for them? What are the models that you've seen?
Yeah. Ellie, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, that's kind of the core of this, really, isn't it? So I would say, from our work, I can draw on some really good examples that we're hoping to write up as case studies and are already written up in terms of good practice. So some of you might have heard of Lancaster West. I'm not sure, I won't get you all to put your hands up just at the risk of being outed. But Lancaster West is a really interesting scheme. It was an SHDF demonstrator, and it's basically on the same estate as Grenfell. And they had a massive job in building trust back up after the Grenfell fire. And the write-up of their work from LSE Housing and Communities is really interesting in terms of how the Housing Authority worked with that community to rebuild trust. So they had 10 principles that they agreed to work to with the community. Some of those were refurbishment will be resident-led. We'll make sure residents can make real choices on the refurbishment. They aim to provide local jobs and skills and training for local people so that people can actually see the benefits, and that they commit to transparent decision-making and feedback. And again, they're really basic things, but for a community that has felt systematically not listened to and has lost a significant amount of trust, actually committing to a process which is transparent and resident-led is huge. Now, the ability to do that at scale is different, but I would say that some of the work that's gone on and that was mentioned by our colleagues at Liverpool City Region around who is actually doing the works and being able to communicate the benefits in terms that people understand is really significant. I don't know if anyone saw, but there's an article out today on the BBC around net zero and a launch of an unfortunate group, which is essentially climate deniers. It's the a US branch of climate denial, which has been kind of promoted in the UK. And the dialogue around that is, you know, has net zero had its time as a term? Because people don't identify with it, you know? People identify with warm, comfortable and healthy homes. People tend to feel quite alienated and just don't necessarily understand what net zero means unless you're in this space, and understandably. So there's something about how we communicate around retrofit to make sure that it actually matches. I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying before, Alastair, you know, what do people care about? What are they interested in? How do we make this relatable? How do we make sure that people understand what the benefits are rather than feel off-put by it or scared by it? And also making sure that people actually feel part, well, not just feel, making sure that people are part of the process, either through jobs, through being able to input, through choice, however that choice manifests, because obviously we have to deliver at pace and cost is a challenge. But all of those things need to be considered because this has broader implications in terms of how we can deliver on our climate targets and also making sure that we tackle fuel poverty. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, we love bad news, don't we? There's something, whenever I see bad retrofit, I hate it, but I'm like, oh, just look how bad that was. And it was great going up to Levenshulme, the project that people bad retrofit are doing, well, Carbon Cop, sorry, and seeing some great retrofit. And that did fill me, I think, for the same level of dopamine release or whatever. But yeah, intrinsically humans just do love bad news. I think to add on, exactly, you know, Ellie's completely right in what she's saying. I think we need a proper standard system and we need it enforced. We don't want grant schemes getting rid of the need for somebody to check that the works have been done right, which is what we've had in the past. It's great to see Labour seems talking about sorting out the standard system, but yes, standards and then enforcement of standards. And then slowly but surely, I think we're in the Levenshulme, so they, I can't remember how big the community is there, but there was 5 properties that went ahead with retrofit out of a number of properties. But people are going to see that. Their neighbours are going to see it. And so slowly but surely, we're going to build up. So we just need, more good practice.
I think that in the field like we're working in, is we're seeing that good practice in terms of that assurance. That's starting to come in now in terms of a lot of the monitoring that's available now. When we started testing buildings new build about 15 years ago in the new build sector, the new build sector said there's no problems, no performance gap, these buildings perform as expected, and they were just making it up. It was an apparition, you know, we weren't, it wasn't real. Anyway, some technologies now come in, meter technologies, so these are smart meter, thermal efficiency, energy rating technologies, and essentially what they can do is use your smart meter data and very minimal amounts of internal temperature data and effectively give you your whole house energy efficiency value, heat transfer coefficient that we were looking at the reduction there. And these technologies now are getting more and more accurate, and they're able now to, so the house builders are now terrified and they're asking us to test all the new builds to get rid of this performance gap because they know that if they're going to be selling something that's 50% over its design target, people are going to start coming back to them, like maybe like what you're getting with the Volkswagen diesel scandal. But these tools now will be able to be used on retrofits as well to give people a bit of that quality assurance that they said, okay, you're putting this fabric retrofit in, and whether that's a housing provider or whether it's someone's paid for it privately, if they're expecting a 50% reduction, these tools should give them a benchmark that they're relatively close on that. I think that's going to tighten up the contractors in terms of what they're doing. But we do need more of these tools so that people can understand that actually you've put someone in to do a job in terms of removing the risk of surface condensation, mold growth at a junction, that we have these tools that we can check that quite quickly and do that. Because the things that we need to do aren't new. For the last 15 years, I'm getting, I shouldn't be in a job really, because a lot of the reports that we're writing, we're saying the same things that are coming up, and it does get down to skills. And the thing is about with retrofit, if someone can mess it up, they will mess it up. You need a far higher skill set than what you get in the new build sector, because we like to say the energy house, it's representative of 7 million homes, but actually every home is different, and you can be asking someone to retrofit 2 semi-detached neighbours, and there'll be completely different challenges one and the next, and they need to be able to think on their feet and understand the problems when they are actually coming up with details on the spot. So they need to understand that, and we need then those tools for people to go in and to be able to quickly verify that the work's being done up to a standard, because you're right, people like bad news, and it's only one news headline that undoes 100,000 good retrofits, and ultimately as well, where we're going to get to is, we get to a critical point when there's been enough good retrofits out there, people are going to be asking to have them themselves, because they'll go around to their neighbours, their friends, their family will be saying, look at my energy bills. And a lot of these new tools that we're getting are giving people feedback on the performance of the houses. I think people will start getting a bit geeky and almost gamifying their energy use. So I think that's going to be quite useful for people.
Can I come in? Firstly, a lot of people in Carbon Co-op already gamify our energy usage. We're a lot of energy geeks. But I think as well, kind of building on what you've both said about assurance and standards and kind of, I guess, the way we would phrase it is accountability. That came through the research as well. Tenants are really frustrated by what they feel is a lack of accountability when it comes to delivery and the quality of delivery, and they don't know who to turn to with that. If something is delivered that is, in their view, substandard, or if they're having challenges, so some clarity from their perspective around who they go to for that. And again, this kind of points back to what I was saying about a single point of contact, but absolute clarity as to how you can get recourse if something goes wrong, particularly if you're on one of these grant schemes, is really important, because generally people don't feel they have as much say over the places where they live and the sort of quality of where they live as well.
To add on that, Colin, because my MCS colleagues will hate me if I don't. So the MCS 2.0, so the standard that's coming out, or the scheme that's coming out later this year, that will have exactly that. So that if somebody has an issue with an MCS installation, they'll be able to go to MCS, who will then act on their behalf to sort it out. That isn't in place at the moment. We need to see that across the board. People don't have anybody to sort out a cavity problem or whatever. Yeah.
It's interesting, actually, because I mentioned our Community Retrofit Hub project, and we've got one pilot in Sheffield, in Sharrow in Sheffield. And when we were walking up to the centre where they're based, there was a street of terraced houses, and one of those houses had solid wall insulation, and it was also the only house on the street with condensation on the windows and the windows open. And, we were just thinking, people are going to walk past that and see that, they'll probably talk to the people who live there, and it's just such a bad bit of PR, as the questioner mentioned, about having external wall insulation done. So, our target for that is to try and get in touch with that household and try and put that problem right. And I think social proof is really, really important. I think it's Nesta who do the heat pump open days where people can go and see heat pumps in action. They may be still here and able to elaborate on that. But I think these type of things are really important, that people can see things for themselves, see good practice for themselves. And that way they'll start to get a much better impression of the whole process. Do we have any more questions? I can see a couple of hands, I think, over there.
Hi, Meilir Thomas from Gwynedd Council. Perhaps a niche issue, but David alluded to time of use tariffs earlier. To be honest, most of the people who I'm seeing in severe fuel poverty are prepayment customers. And how do we look at that now? Because the market doesn't seem to be delivering any options for those people who are prepayment in terms of time of use tariffs using low carbon technology. And how do we move that forward? Thanks.
Yeah, so the thing that always drives me mad is all the things that we need to be able to live very cheaply are only the people who can afford to, who don't need these the most, so actually got these in place. I agree, yeah, it's, these kind of tariffs are very difficult when you're on a prepayment meter. I think some of the answers to this might be around people who actually end up selling energy as services in effect. So in essence, what we're finding is that ultimately, when I found out how much money is in demand-side response and shifting energy, I was like, well, yeah, if you've got the money men involved, there's going to be an answer somewhere. And they are looking at ways of, in fact, packaging heat pumps together so they can control people's heat pumps and then take that saving that they're getting paid from the national, what was the national grid for switching off at certain points. So I think, in essence, some of those might be the answer in a way, is that actually maybe even the bigger kind of cooperatives actually have control of what they call assets in terms of the heat input devices and how they interact with the grid and battery storage. I think that might kind of help some of those kind of, some of the people who do struggle, who these options aren't available to. Because, the technology's there for us to do something pretty soon. It's just about, funding it and whether we actually think, okay, well, is this person better off with a technological solution in terms of batteries and heat pumps and PV rather than actually solid wall insulation. So I think we need to start thinking about, there's a couple of ways to go rather than just trying to do the whole lot as well. It's a tricky one though.
Yeah. I remember I've got a Mixergy hot water tank, which is supposed to be a sort of smart hot water tank, and we've got solar panels, and I've got a My Energy little controller that does diversion, and then we've got the Solar Edge inverter. And I had about 3 apps, and I was just working between the 3 apps trying to work out what was going wrong with the system. I was like, God, this is bloody confusing. And that was me, hopefully with a bit of enthusiasm to do it. So yeah, there's definitely massive improvements, but we've got the solutions are there, aren't they?
Ellie, do you want to say anything about sort of engagement with people on tariffs and the things that they need to actually make their systems run correctly?
Yeah, I mean, so for context, this isn't an area that I personally have done a lot of work on, but our energy systems team has done quite a lot on this, and we have a project called Socialising Flexibility, which might be of interest. So when it comes to engagement around this stuff, it kind of ties into what I was saying around people not really understanding how their energy systems work and function. This isn't quite tariffs, but it is the technologies that are maybe surrounding some of how people understand their energy usage. And what we're hearing from this project is that essentially people don't understand how to use the data that they're getting. And even then, there's a lot of instances, particularly among kind of social housing occupants, where the technology that's installed is basically owned by the housing provider, so they don't have access to any of that data. Like the housing provider can maybe see the temperatures or that sort of thing in their property, but they can't see anything else. And one of the things that we're seeing through our work, particularly with owner-occupiers who can afford to experiment with this stuff, is that there's a lot of benefits to being able to see how you're using energy at different points, how energy flexibility can enable you to actually spend less on energy, for example. And people get quite into it, or some people get quite into it. I guess it depends on your personality. So there's an interesting point here, I think, about how people do or don't have access to the data that's being generated by their heating systems or energy systems, and what that means for their ability to actually interact with their energy usage. I won't go into stacks of detail, but if anyone's interested in that project, let me know and I can put you in touch with the people who are leading it, because it's working with housing providers in Manchester to understand this from a housing provider and tenant perspective as well.
Okay, thank you. I think there was another hand down there. Is that? Yeah, it's still there.
Hiya, my name's Shelley from National Energy Action. So it was just about the positive promotion of retrofit, really. So in my sort of 17 years experience of working in communities around energy, I've seen some really good examples where people are the advocate, where people are really positive about the retrofit that they've actually done on their own homes. And there used to be something in Sheffield called old homes, super homes. And what they were saying is, my home is super. It's old, I've done retrofit, and I'll open my doors and you can come and have a look how good my retrofit is, and I can tell you all about it. And they were really passionate, and it was a network of people who wanted to share the positives about having retrofit. So more things like that, more schemes where people can actually open their doors. But now with social media, they don't really actually have to open the doors. Maybe we could use like YouTube, get people together, showing you around their home virtually, celebrating, letting people know the technical issues that they had, the positives. So yeah, more things like that. And the other observation that I had is something around like neighbourhood approaches when the local authority lead on a scheme. And I think before my time there was something called the enveloping scheme that did double glazing for people and upgraded their homes. And the older adults that I used to work with used to tell me how good it was, because like you said, people got to see the work being done, the quality, and then they could opt in and buy into that scheme. So it was like word of mouth. So yeah, I just wanted to feed that in. Or we can celebrate retrofit.
Thank you. A lovely bit of positivity. And we are just running close to time, so I'm just going to finish off with a question from me for the panel for each in turn, really. And I suppose following that note of positivity, what's the one thing at the moment that gives you hope for the future of retrofit? Maybe start with you, Dave.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about bad news, lack of skills, things that go wrong. But actually, if we look at the case study I just showed there, you know, it's that kind of the technology we have right now, you know, can make people's houses, you know, better, less risk, you know, a lot cheaper to heat. So I think like it's available out there, and we've tested a lot of stuff that that can do that. And I think when we're now marrying as well with a lot of the technologies that we're now testing, and whether that's, say, battery, air source heat pumps, looking at time use tariffs, all these, how these all marry together, I do think that, you know, there's a potential for people's, not just the amount of energy that in terms that they need to heat their home, but actually how they can actually use that energy better. You know, I think we're on the right track with that, but it's about distributing and getting those out to the right people. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think in terms of hope, I guess the work that we're doing and what we're seeing indicates that there has been a lot of movement on this. It's obviously not quite at the pace and scale that we want, but it's ramping up, and I think that that is incredibly positive. Also, from our perspective, the fact that so many people are thinking about and trying to develop new or alternative or better embedded approaches to good engagement and shaping retrofit around people and placing them at the heart is also incredibly positive. I would also say that, and maybe this is because I've not been in the industry as long, but it's quite nice to see that there is a policy landscape or mindset at least that recognises the importance of this, and there is at least intent there. And it was really great hearing from Mayata the other day about the government's ambitions around this, because it does feel like they're pushing in the right direction. So I'm optimistic, but I'm always optimistic. So yeah, and also just to say on the point that was just made about positive promotion of retrofit, one of the biggest things that came back through the research is people love a show home, and people particularly like visiting other people's homes. I love visiting other people's homes, any excuse to have a nosy around someone's house. So when we went on a site visit the other day, as Alastair mentioned, in Levenshulme, where we have an area-based scheme, it's one of the loveliest things to go around someone's house and hear their account of like why it's made a difference to their lives and just how much of a difference it's made. And also the houses that we visited had bright blue render and orange windows, so that is also guaranteed to pick you up a bit.
And Alastair.
Yeah, we're in that heady period before the Warm Homes Plan. It could be everything we all want. I hope my hope isn't dashed against the rocks of reality, but we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, I suppose the other day we had Ashton organised a workshop between some organisations that are delivering retrofit support, you know, place-based approaches. So I was in a room with, we had Jonathan from Carbon Co-op, who had retrofit, we had retrofit works there, we had retrofit Balsall Heath, Loco Homes up in Scotland. So it was great. There were 4 or 5, maybe, I think there's a couple more organisations doing exactly the best practice that we're talking about. You know, good quality work, community engaged, and that was absolutely lovely. Obviously, we need loads more of that, but we've got some great stuff to build from at the moment.
Right. So I'd just like to say thank you to the panel today. It's been a really good session. Thanks to all of you for your contributions. I'm going to say we're going into a break. I hope I'm not wrong, but I think we're now on for a coffee break. So thank you very much.